You're listening to Frontier Matters, the podcast from 1914 Reader. Join us as we dive into bold conversations on growth and change in the frontier economies of the world.
Welcome to another edition of Frontier Matters. So this is going to be what we think might be our season finale, but depending on how it goes. But today, Toby and I, it's just Toby and I. We don't have a guest, so we're going to talk about some topics that we've been discussing in private, and we think they're airing out. So this is just going to be us, hopefully, over the next hour, just talking through some ideas and some things that we see on the horizon and trying to predict the future and see maybe where that might lead. So today's episode is going to be about what we were calling the promise and the perils of AI. Obviously AI is everything, everywhere, all at once these days. So, but then we want to try and contextualize it in the Nigerian African context, where are the opportunities and where are the dangers, So yeah, Toby, how's it going?
I'm alright, man. It's been a hell of a season, and here we are.
Yeah. So when you jump on and say, oh, you want to do a podcast, you don't really realize how much work goes into it until you start. But I think it's been okay. We've done quite well. We have some really good guests. And obviously a lot of prep work goes into this, but hopefully we think we'll be able to do even better in the coming season. And we'll like your, listeners will like your help and suggestions as well. If you think there's somebody we should speak to or there's a topic that we should cover, you can let us know and we'll try and see, okay, maybe we can discuss that on the podcast. But anyway, to today's topic, Toby, yeah. So maybe let me just lay the scene. One of the things I've been kind of thinking about is, first of all, what can AI do for a country like Nigeria, or generally African countries, in the sense that what are the opportunities to, I don't want to use the word leapfrog because we know how misleading and deceiving that leapfrog word is, because, you leapfrog something, you think, I don't need to know that thing anymore. And then later on in the future, you realize that actually that skill is useful. And obviously the example I always like to use is how to actually deliver last mile infrastructure. When we had landlines in Nigeria, maximum number, I think we topped out at something like 100,000 landlines across the whole country. And then when GSM came, we thought, oh, yeah, this is a fantastic opportunity. Now we don't need to lay cables in the ground anymore and all that. But the reality is, you still need that skill. If you know how to dig the ground and lay telephone cables in there, it means you'll be able to do it for broadband. You might even be able to do it for water. But Nigeria never learned that last mile skill, and it keeps coming back. So yeah, so I think back to AI. AI, while it presents opportunities, it doesn't mean that some things that we have failed to do or we've not learned to do, it doesn't mean that we will not ever need to do them again. So, AI can give you a temporary boost and all that, but still, you still need to learn those hard skills. So I think in this case, the first thing I wanted us to talk about was education, right? This is a big problem for Nigeria. If you've been following the news, you've been seeing all kinds of stories around JAMB. They had tech issues, people were failing, then they passed, and all of that. And now you have WAEC, people doing stuff under candlelight and all that kind of stuff. And this is even just the technical bit. We haven't actually even discussed the fundamental bit of what exactly is in the curriculum and how is it being delivered to them, who is teaching them. So I think one of the things we talked about, and we talked about this on the last podcast with Charlie as well, but that paper, that World Bank paper, for me, it was quite an exciting paper in the sense that it showed what AI can do, in the sense that you have a low-cost solution where all they did was basically install ChatGPT, and under a teacher's guidance, students were able to learn English and reasoning. And by the end of the 6 week, they found that, there was this 3 standard deviation difference between the kids who used the AI and those who didn't. And, in simple language, that's something like up to 2 years learning gap opened up between them. So that's just an amazing thing whereby we obviously we've not done the work of training teachers continuously. We've not done the work of investing in our curriculum, but if AI can allow us compress a lot more learning into a shorter time period of time and quicker, then maybe we have some hope of really improving our human capital.
So I mean that's a fantastic structure you just laid. And just to go back to that word leapfrog, I think I attended a talk a few years ago by Robert Wade, and he really laid waste to that concept in one simple sentence that development is not a leapfrog, it's a hard slog, really. Whatever it is you
Yep.
think that you have leapfrogged, you will still, as we say in Nigeria, you still meet it in front. And I think with AI, so I'll put this back to you. Obviously, when we are talking about education, and I think you and I discussed this when we were at the Sam Altman event, the Open AI event in Lagos. The real issue in education vis-a-vis developed countries is the learning gap, the huge learning gap that we complain about investments in education. Even in some, and I've seen several studies where even investments in education has only managed to improve schooling and not learning. So that was what I
Yeah.
found.
Yeah. That's a good point.
That was
Yeah.
what I found so fascinating about that paper, the World Bank paper you alluded to. But it left me with a bit of some question that um if we are building this on technologies that is not native to us, that also the capacity in and of itself is not domesticated in any sense. Are we not back to the leapfrog problem all over again, where the ability, that latent, implicit, tacit knowledge to be able to train students and impact knowledge completely disappears because we've managed to find some technological stopgap? I mean, it's the same way we use the internet, and everybody thinks, oh yeah, we don't need school. We have ChatGPT, we have Google. You can do this, you can do that. Just Google it. So I wanted to put that to you that it doesn't, that in and of itself present a paradox. The fact
Yeah.
that we have so badly missed the boat on learning. We have failed to equip teachers. I read a paper a couple of years ago, I think by Justin Sanford and some colleagues from the Center for Global Development, on something that is like almost correlated elsewhere, which is test scores and average earning in the labor market. And that correlation, I think they did it for a WAEC cohort in Ghana and Senegal. That correlation in West Africa is completely broken, such that your test score does not predict your average earning in the labor market.
Yeah.
We
Yeah. I saw
basically,
a paper like that
yeah,
recently as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
which basically just means that our students are not learning really. So, like, is this real? Is this a solution that is real that can scale? And what are the capability challenges?
Yeah. So I think the thing to be clear about, definitely, I mean, the World Bank paper showed that the students need guidance. There's no getting around that. There has to be somebody there with a teacher who is guiding them on how to use this thing. Because I mean, if you leave kids with ChatGPT, I mean, in fact, there was another example. I'm not sure it was an RCT, but basically, I think it was in Colombia, where they just gave the students ChatGPT and just left them to it. And by the time, at the end of a few weeks, they actually found that the kids had, quote unquote, gotten dumber. Because they were just basically outsourcing their brain and all that kind of thing. So there is no doubt about that. That there has to be some skilled guidance. And again, this is a teacher, right? So we can't escape that part. But I think one thing, so I remember when Buhari first became president in his first couple of years, and the Economist did a long read on teacher training, and they were basically, and this was obviously, there was no AI at the time, but the whole point of the piece was that there is hope now, in the sense that teacher training does not have to be any kind of, say, you send somebody to a teacher training college for 4 years or something, and then they have to go and spend a certain number of years trying to become a teacher. What they showed with various examples was that you can now actually get someone who is, as long as the person has reasonable level of enthusiasm and application, in 6 months you can train somebody to be a teacher. And the whole point was that you can give them tools to take into the class with them, so they don't have to rely on themselves alone. And there are various types of this. I think you had all these bridge academies and all that, who gave teachers iPads, and basically, obviously, the teacher is trained, but the teacher kind of like knows that they are not alone. They are not alone in the class, and if they have a problem, there is somebody nearby, next door to them. So there were various examples. I think there was one Chicago college whereby you could actually train loads of, if you had the political will, right, and if you wanted to do it, you could get teachers out. So I think there's that. So, but to your point, definitely we cannot escape having to do some kind of training for teachers. Now, the second bit is that, again, if the 6 month example, and this involved a physical campus, if you like, so the teachers had to actually be somewhere for 6 months.
Yeah.
Maybe AI makes that easier or better, whereby now you can also train teachers. Again, you need a robust mechanism for selecting people. You can't just pick any graduate and say, oh, like what we do for NYC, where we don't even know, a teacher is not just somebody you can just pick off the streets. You need to, filter for some kind of.
So, but I mean, that's an interesting junction that we got to. I'm curious, why is NYC failing to close the teaching gap? I'm not even talking about the learning gap here, because I mean, you see so many communities in Nigeria where there are no teachers. Let's not even talk about the infrastructure. But we have an annual program where almost all the graduates out of the tertiary institutions are basically conscripted into teaching. So why haven't we seen that effect in closing the teaching gap? Because I mean, if we have a supply, a thick supply pool, then we can close the training gap, and hopefully that helps close the learning gap with AI and other forms of technology.
So I think for that one, my simple answer to that is the supply gap. The supply is somewhat illusory. So if you just look at the numbers, right? So like what? Say maybe 2 million students do JAMB every year or something. Out of that, JAMB, you see that this whole JAMB failure thing, where they are failing huge numbers of people, is actually just a way of managing spaces in university, because there are just not enough spaces. And obviously, with the kind of population growth we have, and the kind of demographic structure of Nigeria, where the vast majority of the population are young, so in reality, when you think about it, the number of people who are getting into university, so out of that 2 million, I don't know, maybe the pass rate is, I don't know, maybe 20% will get into a school. I think there are about maybe 500,000 university places. By the time you start filtering that down, when you get, say, 500,000 people, a quarter of those who sit JAM enter into university, and then all the way through, maybe that 500 at the end becomes 450, maybe 50,000. I'm being generous. 50,000 drop along the way. And then obviously, when you get to that, how many will become teachers? Maybe 200,000. All of a sudden, it doesn't look that. But when you look at the kind of demographic numbers we have, I mean, we have out of school children alone something like what, 10 million or something. So when you compare that with the number of potential teachers you have, it looks like a lot. But in reality, when you compare with the number, just the sheer number of young people you have in Nigeria, and the sheer number of people who fall by the wayside, and how many of those, by the time you filter all that through, starting from the 2 million who sit JAMB, then maybe the 500K who gets in, then those who become JAMB, you might end up with maybe 100,000 teachers a year. And what I mean, what is 100,000 teachers going to do if you just take that and say 10 million out of school children? So I think that's the that's where we have a kind of, there's just a limit, right? There's just a limit to how much you can use conscription for this kind of thing. And you know, we have to be honest with ourselves. You know, it's one thing you cannot, what are you going to get out of paying people 70,000 naira a month, sending them far away from home, and then telling them to go and teach for 1 year? I mean, it's not a, whatever we think of it is not a solution. If you want teachers, then you're going to have a real structured plan to get teachers in a sustainable way and pay them well. You know, definitely pay them more than 70,000 a month.
And I mean, this might seem like a trivial point, but I'm not even ruling out. I don't have the numbers. I think NCC will have the numbers. I think we graduate about 400,000 students a year now. Okay, let's say some people drop out along the way, some don't go for service, whatever. But I won't rule out civil service mago here also as well. In the sense that, did you remember the time when Oshiomhole fired 40,000 teachers in Edo State?
Yeah, I remember.
Because they failed an assessment test. So, and I mean, in my previous life, I go to Edo State quite a lot. It just never looked like a state where 40,000 teachers go to work Monday to Friday. Exactly. So it just doesn't feel like it. So what I'm getting at is that it's such a deep and holistic problem that requires enough dedication, and I'm not sure that we have the right institutional incentives quite yet, which then, but another thing I want to draw your attention to is that also, wouldn't there be some kind of place inequality here? What I mean by that is that, how does it scale? Definitely, there are also infrastructure gaps. You need internet to use ChatGPT. I'm sure if we break down out of school children and even learning deficiencies, it's a lot more concentrated in the rural areas and
Yeah.
certainly some parts of the country.
Yep. Which is where you probably don't have internet. Yeah.
Yeah. So does it scale that solution?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I mean, again, it is, you know, like we started off talking about, it is merely an opportunity. Nigeria has a long track record of wasting opportunities. So, I mean, because opportunities are there, just because it's an opportunity does not mean it's going to fall in your lap. You know, you still have to do some work to get it going. You know, so I mean, it will not surprise me. We have to be frank here. Nigeria can waste the opportunity because if you take AI as something that you spot it as an opportunity, then you need to dedicate resources to it. You need to say, okay, look, here's an opportunity for us to close the learning gap. Here's an opportunity for us to give our human capital a boost in a relatively short time. And it's going to cost us, but we will need to get, you know, look, NCC, all these government agencies, they collect some share of telecom revenues to boost rural connectivity and all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, if you go and check in there, there's billions somewhere, you know, being collected by some regulator for the express purpose of boosting rural connectivity, connection, and all that kind of stuff. You know, broadband access, telephony access, that kind of thing. Well, here you are. Now is the time to put your money where your mouth is. So if you've been collecting all this money all this year, probably somebody's just sitting on it somewhere. But if you were really serious and you said, "Oh, if we take this, we see this as an opportunity for us to really do something," then this is where you can start to take all those funds you're collecting and really put them to good use. You know, make sure that there are mobile phone masts in rural areas, or even if it's actual physical cables, you subsidize, because I mean MTN is not going to build a it's not going to lay fiber optic cables to some village in the northeast without some kind of government backing or support. It's just the reality. You know, I mean, there are probably no customers there for them. But if we feel that it is important enough for us to get this thing out there, those are the kind of things that will happen. So you already have some funding that you're collecting. You know, it's probably, I don't know what those funds go to. I don't know what their KPIs are. I don't know how much they've actually delivered in terms of that kind of those things. So yeah. So again, like I said, it's merely an opportunity. We are perfectly capable of wasting it. We've wasted opportunities before, and we can waste opportunities again in future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another point I want to bring up. I'm not really pushing back. I'm just playing the devil's advocate. So I mean, I hear you, but even if I'm sure if we break down the data, I'm quite familiar with Nigeria, so I'm using Nigeria, and I'm sure in Africa you might see similar patterns in many African countries. The collapse of education and particularly learning in Nigeria is not just a rural phenomenon, it's total. Like,
Yeah.
urban students are very, very stupid too, right? They do not learn anything in school, even the expensive schools that they go to, right? And I mean, the real opportunity in taking advantage of something like this is you want to improve your human capital so that 20 years from now,
Yeah.
Nigeria's human capital pool is much better than where it is today. I'm saying that even if we exploit the naturalness of that alone, like we didn't do anything to correct all the inequalities that may exist in infrastructure and all these other things, that okay, let's say that this remains an urban, a pseudo elite phenomenon, right? I feel like it's something that at policy level, there still has to be some commitment. Like you said, in terms of curriculum, there has to be some deliberateness, because you won't be surprised that a lot of elite schools in Lagos, they have access to these things, but they
Yes.
have completely shunned methods and tools that will enable their students and pupils to learn. A lot of them are adopting, I mean, schools in Abuja, parents in Abuja are sending their children to go learn British accent. Um, yeah, schools in Lagos have adopted all these new age teaching methodology from the US or whatever, where there's no more pedagogy in the classroom. They cannot do basic math. They cannot do basic reading. But when you go to their schools, you find PlayStation 5. They have everything. They have everything. They have ChatGPT. They have Khan Academy, all these tools totally at their disposal. But, like they want to bring the foreign life here. So the classroom environment, the teaching method is all laid back. It's all, concept learning, as they call it. So my point is, at policy level, we can take advantage of this to maybe do something as simple as curriculum design or
Yeah.
redesign
Yeah.
that will
Yeah.
be enforced that, okay, in schools, these are the things that you have to teach, mandatorily. Things that improve learning, basic math skills, basic reading skills, critical thinking skills, skills that 20 years from now, even if it is just 20% of the working population that can compete at the global level, we
Level.
have
Yeah.
something.
It's something. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's a good point. I mean, like you said, actually, when you step back and say, "Oh, okay, AI is new and all that kind of thing," but actually, those who already have access to these tools and this and all this stuff, what have they done with it? And like you said, the signs are not that encouraging. At the end of the day, this has to be at a macro policy level, and education is something where you have to want to do it. Politicians do not instinctively like it because you are here for 4 years. Education is going to pay off in 10, 15 years. I mean, and even and this is before you even talk about the kind of politicians we have who are so short-sighted, in the sense that they just don't see any reason why they want. So they rather renovate schools, give it a new coat of paint, that sort of thing, and that. So things like curriculum design, they're just not, I mean, so yeah, it has to be something we want to do, and then say, look, here is an opportunity, and we need to drive this stuff. And one of the things I would like to see, if we were serious about this, would be some kind of continuous testing, right? Right now, kids are pretty much probably just passing through school by age. The education minister, for example, made a lot of noise recently and created a lot of fuss about age, that sort of thing. But actually, we're at the point now where, because we've done so badly with education over the years, age has to be a secondary consideration, right? So, I'll use an example. So my mom is quite old. So she was in school. She was young when this was before the British left, but when they were doing when we already had some regional government and they were introducing free education. Now, she was sort of slightly privileged in the sense that her dad had a good job, so she was in school, and but it was a small class, it wasn't universal. Education wasn't universal at the time, and then the AG, the action group, decided that, there was going to be free education. And then literally overnight, her class size maybe quadrupled in number, but the teaching staff remained the same. So obviously, from our point of view, our education, the quality of our education went down. But I think the key thing at that time was that it actually wasn't by age. The people in the class weren't by age. They did some kind of testing, So she had people in class, for example, who she used to call uncle or something because they were much older, and she was actually one of the youngest in the class. So that's something that, even as bad as that was, or even as botched as that rollout was, it made some sense. And I think we've gone to that point now in Nigeria whereby we can't just say, because you are 4 years old, you are in primary one. Actually, there's so much damage that has been done nutritionally. The nutrition gap between a middle class child and a poor child is so wide. How do you exactly think that, the brain development, that critical brain development that happens in the first few years of their life, how is it going to be the same? So, we have to destigmatize the whole repeating thing. I mean, that sort of thing. And say, look, okay, this child here, how old are you? You are 10 years old. We'll do a series of tests for you. And we think that for you to actually have a really good education, we think that even though you are 10 years old, we think that maybe you should be in primary two.
Okay, because
Right? So,
you're
and that might
reading
make
you're reading at a seven
you're
seven
reading
year old
exactly.
7-year-old level.
Exactly. So yeah, you are reading and reasoning at that level, and that might just mean that in that class, there might be 5 year olds there, there might be 6 year olds, there might be, but we need to find a way to actually, and this is a social aspect to it now, we need to find a way to say, look, we are going to actually create, because the key thing, what we want to achieve is that we want everyone to be able to read and write at a certain level, right? So you don't just promote, I don't know if you watch The Wire,
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I saw.
yeah. So
I don't know what the hype is about. It
yeah.
was pretty boring, but I saw one season.
Okay, so there was a season in it where they talked about something called social promotion,
Yeah.
right? So then they were talking about how urban education had kind of decayed, and there was a man he took his son to school, and the boy, he knew that the boy was way behind on education, but then he was just surprised that at the end of the year they had promoted him, and it was not like, what's going on here, and they said, oh yeah, we have a policy of social promotion. So I think this was in Florida or something. But anyway, no, not in Florida. But this was something that Jeb Bush stopped when he became Florida governor and said, look, you get promoted if you meet all the criteria. And we need to find a way to do that, because right now, obviously, repeating is a kind of, is almost taken as a given that, oh yeah, just keep going through the system by age. So regular testing, getting people, and make sure that, look, if you are 10 years old and you are reading at the level of a 6 year old, then we want to help you, right? And you might be able to catch up, after a couple of years, you might be able to say, oh, okay, now you are 11, and we think that actually you've made 2 years, like just like what the AI RCT did. I say, okay, now you're 11 years old, but we think that in that last 1 year, you've actually gained 2 years, then we can double promote you, but it has to just be something. And that one is a social policy, right? It's a government policy. And I spoke to somebody about this before, and he said something like, that it will be a massive issue to get through. But again, it needs determination because there's a whole kind of industry and whatever on the whole idea that repeating is such a stigma and just a bad thing. I mean, I know people here. I know someone here, for example, who, in the UK, kids, there's a window of when you get into school. So I think it's up until August 31st, when if you're born up until August 31st, then you can enter that year. So you might have a year where a child born in August might be the youngest in the class, and sometimes they struggle. The youngest one struggles. So I know somebody whose son was, his child was the youngest in the class, and it just took him out. I'm made him, got him to repeat 1 year, and and this was something that they spoke to teachers about, and teachers said yes, it would actually be good for his development. So rather than being the youngest in the class and being slow and all that kind of thing, because at that age, obviously, brains are developing really, really quickly, that it would be better for him to be in a class where he's, even if not the oldest, but in the middle range. And the boy and the child has been fantastic. I mean, what is it? Just a couple of months. That sort of thing. It's been wonderful for the child. So it's not a big issue per se here. So I think that's one of the kind of things we need to do: continuous testing and getting people to ensure that you are not just floating through school. You're actually learning something, and we let you go when we are confident that you are at the level that you should be.
I don't want to be pessimistic, but you're really opening the Pandora's box with this because, and I hope listeners go listen in the archives in Frontier Matters, the Lance Pritchett episode. He said something which is to your point that when people ask him that, how did Vietnam manage to like do so much on education? And he said, the answer is simple because they want to. But
Yeah.
like funders and multilateral development institutions didn't pay you to do a 10-year study just to tell them that answer. So he has to make stuff up. But if you don't want to, then you won't do it. And,
And I think the Vietnam point is a good one because, you know, communists have an incentive to educate their people because communism produces an incredible amount of propaganda, right? And the propaganda is in the written form. So if you are running a communist regime, you have to be putting out propaganda constantly because it's almost kind of like brain
washing.
exactly. But you can, if you have an illiterate population, how are you going to brainwash them? So you need people to be able to read at a certain level, really. And so that's where the incentive came from, and that's the reason why they wanted to do that. Look, if we're going to run a communist government, a society here, people need to be educated so that we can then control and then just be feeding them all this propaganda. So yeah.
I mean, and to your second point on testing, again, I'm not so when I read the study, the YX study in Ghana and Senegal, and all that, I was not surprised because we are just seeing the results in the last 5 years or so. But you went to school in Nigeria, at least up to college level, so this wouldn't be strange to you. We have been waging war on testing culturally for decades. I'm sure you are familiar with the phrase that examination is not a true test of knowledge. It's a very popular Nigerian saying. And usually the people who say that to you are the people who are usually failing in class. I guess the bigger point is that we are not a society that believes so much in men. So at the end of the day, culturally, we don't like testing. We don't really want to know the true ability of people because then all these other fabrics like patronage, favor, miracles, and all these other surrounding nonsense completely collapses. If that link between people's ability and their achievement, if our entire political economy itself is not built on merit. So otherwise, we'll have our brightest and our best will not be in the UK or Canada or whatever. They will be here running the country or running the biggest firms in the country. So it's what you are proposing it will take a cultural revolution. Maybe not the Maoist kind, but
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of the Maoists, I mean, I'm reading a book at the moment about China, and one of the things, so I'm halfway through now, but basically, so I'm at the point, so it starts off with Mao just before the Great Leap Forward, and then it's going all the way. So right now, I'm at the point where Mao is dead, and Deng is about to take over, right? So, Hua Guofeng, and he has basically shackled the Gang of Four, and then so we're roughly around 78, 77, right? Now, one of the things that, because of the insanity of the Cultural Revolution, they stopped testing, university testing and all of that. For a very long time, there was no university, nobody was getting this. It was just a mess. They closed down academies of sciences and universities, that sort of thing. So obviously, after Mao had died, and the idea that we should bring back learning again, and when they opened up the examination, the thing again, the sheer amount of people who came forward who wanted to do exams, or almost kind of like a pent up desire. And I thought to myself that this is really fascinating, right? I mean, you've had 10 years where people have been telling you that, up is down, left is right. I mean, one of my favorite examples of the Cultural Revolution was that everything was so turned upside down that the Red Guards basically decided that because red is the color of revolution, the street lights, so red became go and green became stop. So initially, obviously, people were confused. And if you drove your car, because it was green, you drove your car, they will get you and they will beat the living daylights out of you, saying that, we had changed everything and basically turned everything upside down. But even after all of that, and the Cultural Revolution went on for a decade, intense upheaval. But even up to that, the moment that the opportunity to start learning again came up, people, millions, came forward for the opportunity, and they were overwhelmed by the amount of people who actually wanted to take the exam, that sort of thing. So I think, obviously, to your point, there's probably a cultural, aspect to all of this. How do we learn as a people, right? I mean, what is our way of learning? What is the way, And this is a point I made repeatedly when we're talking about formation, and I said that, look, you can tell. And it struck me one particular day, when I was watching one video of one guy who was running, it was kind of like a tour guide in Badagry, right? So in the Badagry, the slave, that first duplex in Nigeria, and all the slave barracoons and all that kind of thing. So a tour party came, and this guy was taking them around. And the guy had all these facts in his head, and he was talking about them in a very, very impressive manner, right? So as I was talking, I was saying that this was where the first this happened. This was where every time he makes a point, a historical point, the crowd would just be going, and they were just like, wow, wow. People basically, he had already developed this style over some time, but people were engaging with him, and it occurred to me that for whatever reason it is, we engage a lot more with oral history, right? Now, oral history obviously has problems. For example, if somebody was born in 1700 in the Middle Belt, say Nupe Kingdom of Nigeria, and then maybe the person was a warrior, then they created a kind of panegyric or a song or a historical story for him. Initially, you might start and say, oh, he was born in this area, and there were many trees around, and there were rivers around, and all that kind of stuff. The original story will probably take in not just him, but his environment and all that kind of. But as you start to tell that story over time, anything superfluous to the telling will be taken out. So if a story of that guy only came to us orally, by the time it gets to us, we might lose sight of the fact that actually, in this area now, even though there's no water or no lake or no river there was actually a river there at the time. Or maybe there was a forest there at the time. So you lose all of that when you transmit orally, because people keep cutting down as part of their because of obviously memory management. Now, I said, technology has bailed us out in this case. You like oral history? That's fine. record it, right? Record, even if the only way somebody knows how to tell history is just take a phone, take a recorder, put it in front of them, let them say it. And I always encourage people that, look, if your parents are old, go and talk to them. You don't need to write it down, just record it. Even now these days, there are AI tools and all this kind of thing that can transcribe, record it. And once you've committed it to that retrievable format and that unchangeable format, then if somebody tells a story orally today, there is no reason why 100 years from now somebody cannot listen to that story in the original form. So this is just an aside on how we learn history, which was a disadvantage for a long time because we were using oral history to translate to transmit stories down, and things kept getting cut out, and we lose a lot of the context of stories. But now with technology, and this is not unique to us. Like, you look at the Bible, for example. The Bible was frozen in time the moment it was printed, right? All the stories of the Old Testament that we know of Moses, God knows what the original version of those stories were. But until it got to the format where they could actually print it, and then you had a fixed version. And now the Bible can be read. The way I read the Bible is how somebody will read it in 200 years' time. So those are the kind of things. And we probably need to find out, how do we learn as a people? How do we commit learning? How do we gain knowledge? And how do we, what is the way by which we can infuse that learning with test? And if we don't like testing, maybe we have to downplay the testing part and just focus on the learning. Exactly. And maybe give incentives and say, stay in school, that kind of thing. But we know that, yes, you're going to be the oldest in class, but we might incentivize you in other ways. Anyway, I wanted us to quickly talk about something else. Like, the next time we catch up, maybe we'll talk about the problem. So maybe today we'll just focus on the opportunity. Yeah. So I think the other thing I wanted to talk about today was a couple of things in terms of where AI can be helpful. So, as a kind of like background, right? We have two superpowers in AI right now. Obviously, the US and China. Now, the US, obviously, a lot of the cutting edge innovation is coming out of there, a lot of the models and that kind of stuff. But the US does not have an overarching approach of, say, how are we going to use AI? Right? So it's a free market. People are figuring out different things. So far, so good. What we can see is that people really use it a lot for coding. So what people used to take hours and days to write software, AI can now speed that up to 1 hour, and then people will now value add in other ways. So, there are other maybe silly parts of it. For example, the whole world was consumed by Ghibli images, when fall came, So people are doing all kinds of silly stuff with it, right? And you cannot control for that. It's a free world. People, they put out the models there, do what you like with that. So people will figure it out. Now, China takes a very, very different approach. And this is the same approach they've taken for various other technologies, like the internet, like electricity. Basically, the word they use for the internet, which I really like, was informatization. Basically, they take the internet and say, okay, here is a tool of the internet, put it in everything, right? Put it everywhere, right? Let it be in everything, and then we'll see, if you're a local government, if you're a private business, if you're a state-owned entity, you put the internet in everything you do, and let's see what washes out of that. The same thing with electricity, They started off with electric buses, and they got really good at that. And then now they're putting electricity everywhere. So all the things that are previously using gas, like trains, or buses, or even cars and everything, now they're electrifying everything. This is a challenge that other countries are having, especially Western countries, where they are doing all these things slowly. But they are taking the same approach now with AI, basically saying, look, we might not be able to compete in terms of the frontier models or the innovation or the chips and all of that thing, but with AI now, put it in everything. So local governments are using it, governments are using it, private sector is using it. It's everywhere, in everything. People are, in fact, even up to fortune telling, which, fortune cookies. They now have AI, obviously Chinese love this kind of thing, fortune telling a lot. So they are putting all of that in AI. So, so I think that because of that approach, we might get some really interesting use cases that might be useful to a country like Nigeria or even Africa in general, in the sense that because the Chinese are doing it, they're putting it everywhere, you're going to see really, really valuable use cases. Whereas the US, they might not really be. I mean, the US got barely doing any. They are busy. They are infusing it slowly, maybe with Doge and all this kind of thing. But it's not like there's no deliberate effort to soak the government in AI. Whereas in China, so a couple of points that I thought I really enjoyed, I liked, is that first of all, infrastructure maintenance. Now, obviously, anyone who has been reading below the headlines would know that there's a running theme here where I keep talking about how public infrastructure is just at the mercy of criminals, vandals, or anything. I mean, a country that barely has enough. You put up a bridge, people go and remove the metal. You put up a transformer, people go and destroy it. Any kind of public infrastructure, people go and dig up cables and all that kind of stuff. Now, what they are doing in China is that they are now using a lot of AI for public infrastructure maintenance. And one really fun example that I really caught my eye was glasses, AI glasses. So rather than say a worker has to now go walk maybe 10 miles looking at cables and trying to inspect cables and all that kind of thing, you can just use AI glasses to look at things, and then those glasses can figure out and say, oh, can make you more efficient. Say, oh, actually, these wires are fine, but those ones, there's something, double check this one. So they're using it a lot for infrastructure maintenance, that kind of thing, surveillance, and then when you combine that with drones as well, all of these means that you can actually get a lot better real time data. So for a country like Nigeria, I think maybe, I mean, again, it's an opportunity in the sense that we barely have enough infrastructure, but even the little that we have is at such risk of vandalism, and then you have all this, you know, all this the national grid collapsed or something, and then they spend days trying to look for where the fault is or something. So there's no predictive system basically, in the sense that the grid collapses, everybody hears about it, and they tell you after that, oh yeah, there's a nationwide grid collapse. So I think an interesting use case was going to be using AI for keeping an eye on public infrastructure, public and maintenance, that sort of thing. So that was the first one. I think the second one, that I thought about was agriculture. Again, this uses almost kind of like same together. Now, again, anybody who has been reading below the headlines would have noticed that over the last 2 years, we talked about Nigerian ginger a lot. Now, Nigerian ginger was very, very popular for its taste and its quality. So Nigeria used to export a lot of ginger, and it was such a money spinner for farmers and all that kind of. Now the circumstances remain unclear, but in 2023 there was a disease that really ravaged, that wiped out the ginger harvest in places like Kaduna and Jigawa, and I think a few other places. It really destroyed all of the ginger. So I think what happened was that in 2024, farmers were trying to make up their losses, so they doubled down and planted even more to try and catch up. And then the fungus or whatever it was happened again, and then it wiped us, So now Nigeria's ginger production and export has completely collapsed, pretty much almost nothing. But what you are seeing again, the examples come from China. You are seeing the use of AI glasses, where a farmer just wears a pair of glasses and goes around to the farm inspecting, just looking at what you're looking at. And then the glasses can spot and say, something is going on here. Maybe these leaves are looking slightly different. And it can analyze data in a way that a human might not be able to do. So you give farmers glasses, and then they can spot disease in time or something, or in real time. And maybe if somebody is monitoring it somewhere and can say, this looks like we're getting a lot of images from farms here, and say, this rice crop might be at risk, that sort of thing. Again, this requires a lot of effort, a lot of coordination. Somebody has to, but those are the two aspects that I found really interesting. So the public infrastructure, maintenance and surveillance for a country that is really struggling with the little infrastructure and the damage that's being done to them, and then crop agricultural predictive nature, whereby we only hear about disease or crop damage after it has happened, but there should be a way to predict this if AI can help with that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I don't know. I hate to be that guy, but
No,
maybe,
no. I mean, that's why we're doing this.
maybe I'll just be so. Maybe there's a general theory here that we can deduce together. Maybe something that says maybe a general theory of capabilities of nations, something like that. That maybe it's something that predicts your ability for technological adoption that is
Yeah.
dependent on your capability to master previous or an inferior technology.
Yep.
A lot of
Yep. Yep.
like these are real opportunities, like you said, but they are just going to run into hard problems in Nigeria. First of all, on how China uses AI, like you said, I mean, it's fascinating. And I got a sense of that when I read the story of DeepSeek and how a lot of the people that worked in, first of all, as in producing that model and then the product, were just enthusiastic, young, insanely brilliant Chinese researchers
Yep.
who are
Yeah.
so motivated by like a gazillion social problems in China, like air quality, infrastructure, the climate, transportation. So I'm not surprised that China is just going inject it in my veins with AI, right? So, and also, I mean, let's not forget the incentive of the CCP. China is a gigantic surveillance state. So that pretty much. I mean, Donald Trump's madness notwithstanding, I don't think America has much of a national agenda in technology or anything for that matter. So I think what we are seeing is perhaps differences in political system in terms
Yeah.
of application of technology in society. But I mean, out of where we most likely get the most everyday consumer products in terms of AI, regardless of whatever fancy crap that Johnny Ive and Sam Altman are doing, is China. I'm quite bullish on that. In Nigeria, you see all sorts of things, everyday household things, almost everything, kitchenwares, tablewares, garment. It's from China, right? So I mean, and if AI is like the next frontier, even in terms of how people consume, it's probably going to come from China, right?
Yeah.
It's just that in Nigeria, which like is the microcosm of example here, you're going to run into some hard problems. The conversation with Michelle, for example, I'm not sure if that part made the cut. So he was talking about horticulture. Like we always talk up in Nigeria about quality seeds, agric extension services. And he described a project that the Dutch government was doing in horticulture where they brought in the seeds, they worked with the farmers, brought in the seeds, and you could saw the drastic increase in yields. Like it really worked. But you know what the problem is? How do you then get it from wherever in the north to tables? Logistics,
Yeah.
right? It's almost impossible because what he said was that he couldn't find Dutch farms to do it. There are no Nigerian farms that, quote unquote, can do it. So that is an agricultural intervention that is failing because of transportation and logistics.
Many such cases, as they say.
Exactly. So you give the farmer AI glasses. I mean, sidestepping the problem of farmers using AI glasses. Let's even say that you leap that hurdle successfully. Okay, so you identify the disease. Okay, and then what?
Yeah. So you then obviously you then need to get them, I don't know, herbicides or whatever.
Yeah,
You need to
yeah,
actually get stuff
yeah,
out to
yeah.
them. and then the states,
Exactly.
we run into capability there. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So if you talk to farmers, and we've had these challenges, I'm sure you remember, you probably even wrote about it. The tomato 2015, 2016, the tuta absoluta that ravaged tomatoes.
yeah,
We've had issues with onions in the last year or so as well. I wrote about that briefly in 1914. And when you listen to farmers, for example, the chairman of the onion farmers, whatever, how simple interventions like, okay, we are ready to pay for quality seeds. We are ready to pay for all these things. But how the process of even getting it to them is so difficult and sometimes even politicized, such that the guy that is the government attaché to the farmers does not even bother to answer a simple phone call, right? It's amazing how much we are our own enemies, even despite all these low hanging fruits, things that like AI that have already been developed elsewhere. This is what technology transfer is really all about. They've developed it somewhere. Just find use case, use
yeah.
it. But even that,
We have a long track record of, taking a gun, pointing it to our feet, and shooting, right? So we can. I mean, to be honest, nobody can do as much damage to Nigeria as Nigerians themselves have done to the country. So this is just the reality of how things are. Like I said, like we've been saying on this podcast, these are merely opportunities, right? I mean, water, pipe-borne water, right, is nothing needs to be invented. You know, the whole idea of how you purify water, how you pipe it into homes, you don't need to invent anything. And yet, I don't know if there are Nigerians alive today who have actually lived through a period where public water supply flows into their house. This is a basic problem. And he has, a few days ago, I was talking to somebody, and he shared an image from one of these British historical accounts, the Victorians, I think it was 1875, when they were building the central sewer in London. Because, London went through something called the Great Stink, where the whole city was smelling. And then Bazalgette and a few other people just said that, what, we have to solve this problem by constructing a giant central sewer. And that sewer is actually been in place till today. The new sewer system, it was only a few years ago they started, adding a surcharge to our water bills to pay for a new London sewer system. So, but he now, when the person shared it with me, he now mentioned that, that there's no state in Nigeria today that can boast of a central sewer system.
you dig your
You know,
own soak away
this
now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is 200-year technology. You don't need to invent anything. It's pretty straightforward, but we can't do it. It's defeated us. So, like you said, technology adoption. I mean, I wrote a piece not long ago about how the tallest building in Nigeria has been the same one since the 1970s, and you just look at it. There, have we not learned anything? Even if it's just for pride, that okay, I mean, can't we build anything taller than this? And it's not, so yeah, so there's a technology adoption problem, and there's also the state capacity problem. That these are wicked problems that will really, really stand up against any kind of good intention you have, and they are our own. They are.
What even really really smacks me in the face is how, okay, I mean, we can talk about capabilities. Maybe you run into problems when you never really learn to do stuff, and you try to do it and you run into problems because you never really learn it, and then you have to learn it. There was a point in this country where the richest man in Africa really didn't know how to build a refinery, and people didn't think that was a problem. But me, I digress. How we even feel at an idea level to see these things as problems that needs solution. I'm gobsmacked. I'm sure you are aware Every rainy season, we've been experiencing unusually heavy rainfall since the beginning of August. And as usual, Lagos floods every year. It's an annual festival. And every year and I hate this attempt to always plug whatever is the cool thing by environmentalists or foreign donors. And everybody says climate change. Climate change is climate change. I'm not a climate denier, but the basic city planning in Lagos is what is failing. Is not
Not. Climate change is a cop out. Yeah.
so like I mean, the last couple of weeks were really, really bad. And how the state government did not have any sense of shame when the environment ministry reeled out a list of 173 estates, not buildings, estates that
They were
were
illegal.
illegal, all in Ibejuleki.
When I saw that list, I was asking someone down. So how many are legal? I mean, 173 is a big number of estates. Right?
Exactly.
So what what exactly is legal in this case?
And whenever such issues go on, my first question is: so where were you when they were building? So how we fail to grasp these things? Like if you have to build something in Lekki, never mind the fact that you can pay a simple bribe to do these things. Even the building control agency will still come before you finish your project to come and extort you round two, sometimes 3-4 rounds, depending on the size of the project. How we do not even I'm sure that in the whole of Lekki or probably Lagos Island, there's no city planning office. If you want to do a project, you have to come to Alausa, the seat of government. How we fail to grasp that those at an idea level, that these things are a problem. Okay, I may not have the know how to do it. Okay, so how do I do that? Do I work with foreign partners? Do I import this? Blah, blah, blah. But we don't even see these things as problems. We talk every year. Everybody talks themselves hawks about food security in Nigeria. I mean, 1914 and various other from we talk about agric extension. How hard is agric extension? Seriously. So again, I'll go back to my point that perhaps what we really, really need is I don't want to use that word cultural revolution, but we need we have a modernization challenge.
Yeah.
For example, the idea of the green revolution, how it percolated in societies that were able to achieve rapid agricultural surplus. It started with, at the idea level, everybody who is anybody know that this is a problem that we have to solve.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about, I guess maybe we can wrap up here, but, you talked about technology, and this is obviously, everyone knows that my bugbear is that billionaire, and I'll probably not mention his name, but, I keep saying this point all the time, right? We now have 3 billionaires in Nigeria, quote unquote, manufacturing cement, and all 3 of them have their plants built by the same Chinese contractor. In any other country, this is a scandal.
Yep.
Right? So we've had this cement policy for about 20 years and zero technology transfer until today. And this is not even different. So if it would have been, okay, maybe one of them had their plant built by a Japanese guy, one had their plant built by a Chinese guy, and another had their plant built by an Australian guy or something. It is the same Chinese company using the same technology, building for 3 different companies, and 2 of them are billionaires out of this thing. So essentially, it's just basically just go to China, it's almost kind of like just pay somebody and then you are a middleman. And I say, if after 20 years of cement policy or whatever you might call it, and a couple of dollar billionaires out of it, if today, what can we show as the technology that we have adopted from this thing? Can we build a cement plant on our own? We can't.
When you make this point,
they can't.
When you make this point, people don't see it. And how I sort of extend the point is, I mean, I call them BPO manufacturers. Anyway, they are not real manufacturers.
Of course.
The point I make to people is that the first cement plants, the first set of cement manufacturing plants in China were built by Koreans.
Yep.
But today, Chinese people are building cement manufacturing plants and capacities all over the world,
Everywhere across the
everywhere in
world.
the world.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the point. But I mean, here we are 20 years after a very supposedly deliberate cement industrial policy, right? I'm sure that all the moves that this person, I was watching him doing the Caribbean thing recently, saying that he wants to go and start manufacturing cement in the Caribbean. I'm sure this person will still take the same Chinese firm.
Of course, it's the same firm. He can't build it on his own. It's the same Chinese firm going to help him build all over the place. Yeah.
You understand? So,
And his quote unquote competitors are also using the same. So he's actually gotten to the point whereby the example that he's laying for those who have come after him is that, oh, if you want to do this cement business, go and use the same Chinese company. So one after the other. It's anyway. I guess today's episode we'll probably leave it there, and then when we do the next episode, we'll probably try and talk about. I mean, this was supposed to be the episode about the promise of AI,
exactly.
but
We didn't, we
we
didn't talk
haven't
so
actually
much about
we
AI.
didn't even really get into the real dangers, the gap that is opening up in things like data centers and all of that. Anyway, we'll talk about that in the next episode. But I guess today's own we've really gone to the point, the challenges around. Again, AI is just an opportunity. It is but it comes dressed in work clothes. So there is going to be a lot of work to be done, and nothing says we can't miss the opportunity and completely waste it. But I hope maybe more people have conversations around this stuff. Maybe somebody will pick it up and say, actually, you know what, I will do this thing not because there's anything in it for me, but because it's the right thing to do. And a lot of leadership has been like that, where people just do things because it is a good and proper thing to do. And there's no reward. There might be no reward for it. Definitely immediate reward. Any kind of long-term solution that you come up with today in Nigeria, there will be no immediate reward for it. But anyway, this has been a good chat. We will see you in a couple of weeks again. Yeah, in 2 weeks. And so I guess we are in our off season now. So maybe the next few episodes will be Toby and I, and then we'll come back, start bringing back guests again. But hope you enjoyed all of this. I might maybe leave some notes in the episode, and then we'll catch you again in a couple of weeks. Toby.
Yeah, Faye, thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks a lot.